Hello and welcome. We have a special episode of a new effort I'm working to do to better benefit our friendly vendors, our partners, right? We don't want to really position any of our partners as just a single point, I just need to pay my bill and move on. These vendors that I have on this webinar series are going to people who want to work with you and improve your business. So with that, I'm very excited to welcome Jared Brantley from Raven Automation here. He has a specialization in Roost and a lot more than that. So that's why today's topic is going to be all about automation. So, Jared, really excited to have you here. Really look forward to getting into the episode.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Awesome. And just like usual, we are going to do a little bit of housekeeping. So if we can get my screen popped up here. We just completed our Pitch It program. We did our final pitch with Channel program. Would love for you guys to go check that out. It was live streamed to my LinkedIn, but you can find that also on the Channel program site. On top of that, guys, we will be joining Can IT Con. So Senteon is right here and we will be over in Canada next month. So really excited for that, the first international show. Additionally, we do have our weekly technical series. We concluded our Chrome hardening series last week with Chris Lair, and next week, Mark Menzies is kicking off Edge hardening, a 12-part series. Really excited to talk about that. And again, all of the webinar content that we produce will be on our website. So here's our Senteon.co website, and all of the episodes will be saved right here. We also love to have fun with some titles. We do our best to also write blogs about these as often as we can. So if you do prefer to read as opposed to watch, those are there for you as well. And the last thing to mention, guys, you can click that login button and you can make a free account. We do have a freemium offering where you can see all of the CIS benchmarks, where they fit across other regulated frameworks. And best of all, you can click right into it, see the pathway, see the description, rationale, and that machine key when applicable. And you can see all of the information about these settings and why they fit into other frameworks. That's all provided to you completely free forever. And on top of that, if you do want to explore Senteon, we perform security hardening remediation. So this is a gap assessment, right? These are all the things that are wrong by default. If you scroll down here with me, you can actually see that we perform the remediation. So this is our largest differentiator because all of this red that's across all these frameworks, we actually fix. All right, guys, thank you for letting me do my typical introduction. Let's get into why we're here. Jared Brantley, automation. What was the title on that slide you put? Chief Automation Engineer. Can we pull up that slide?
Yeah, it's a fancy title. Figure since we're an automation company, I might as well have the title, related to automation.
I love that. Chief Automation Officer. That's what it was. CAO. Is that first of its kind? Was that a little bit marketing telling you to
No,
do it, or you're just very
I,
passionate?
I have seen that in a few places now. So it's funny as our industry is changing and business is changing with new tools like different AI platforms that are out there, various RPA tools that are out there. For guys like myself that have spent many, many years trying to build automations and automate tasks and processes, we're seeing a lot more businesses really head the direction of having automation related roles, both in the MSP space and even at the enterprise level.
So this automation is not just, I mean, it's your C-level title, but there's actual job positions called maybe automation engineer. This is actually like a growing field.
Yeah, absolutely. There's automation engineers, there's automation test engineers, there's the automation QA engineers, automation building. I wouldn't necessarily call it software development, but there are a lot of similarities between automation building for process automation and software development. So it's absolutely a growing field. You see tons of automation related titles in the enterprise space, especially around software development. But we are seeing a lot more of that. Or other titles might be integration managers. I'm seeing some of that in the space now too. As we have integrations for different tools that have to be managed and maintained.
That makes sense. And you mentioned enterprise. So, Jared, again, this is our first time doing a webinar together, and I do want to just give you a personal shout out. We met because you were presenting at MSP GeekCon, and
Cool.
honestly, we didn't have a relationship before this. So, like, thank you for coming on the show, wanting to kind of spread this message and getting to leverage our platform here at Senteon to do this. So, shout out to you there for wanting to kind of spread this education.
Well, thank you. It's been quite interesting. I mean, by nature, I'm more of an introverted kind of guy, so I thought this year I was going to challenge myself and try to get out and do some speaking events at different conferences. And that was actually well before we started this whole thing over at Raven Automation. It was just kind of challenging myself for some personal growth. Uh,
That's awesome.
I was absolutely terrified of getting up on stage to do that.
So that MSP GeekCon event for myself, that was my first time doing a 7-minute presentation. And about a month after that, I had to do a 45-minute workshop at ChannelCon. I say had to, I obviously wanted to, but it was my first time doing anything like that. So what was that? What was your first experience with presenting in person?
Ooh. Well, so the first experience that I did was actually several years ago at an IT Nation event. It was a panel kind of thing, and one of the panelists didn't show up. So here I am, I'm sitting in the room. I'm like one of the early guys because I really wanted to attend that panel. And the moderator for that event from ConnectWise came up, said, "Hey, one of our panelists didn't make it. Can you participate?" Like, what are we talking about? Sure, why not? So I fumbled through that. That was several years ago. But as we came up to the MSP Geek event, I'll just summarize the way I felt. As I walked up to the podium, I saw that somebody had left a bottle of Jack Daniels underneath, and I'm like, "Do I have time to step behind the curtain here and take a hit of this before we?"
Might be part of the presentation if you do it right.
Right, right.
That is awesome to hear. And I mean, shout out to again MSP Geek bringing vendors together with the community and not as the bad guys, right? But we do want to be partners, which is something I really emphasize. I try my best to really handpick the people I do these presentations with because no vendor should just be that billing point. They need to be that partner. So with that, let's actually start diving into some of this. Let's pull up this first slide, and while the audience is looking at this, Jared, you did mention enterprise in there. You go to MSP GeekCon. Do you mind sharing your background personally and who Raven really services?
Yeah, so if I go back in time for my background, I started in the MSP space probably
As an MSP or as an
2009,
employee?
2010 as an employee, really as
Okay,
an intern. A lot of people have never heard the term lease swaps, but I probably spent 6 months just swapping PCs at a medical clinic every single day. You know, Learned a lot along the way.
that'll teach
It
you.
kind of grew from, yeah, I was below level one help desk.
Oh,
All right. So yeah, learned a lot along the way, continue to grow some skills, spent my evenings trying to, train and learn more and all that fun stuff. And eventually just moved on. So after I worked directly for four different MSPs over almost a 15-year period, um, in different levels, operations, management, technical roles, those kinds of things. I also in 2016, 2017, something along those lines, after some recommendations from some very good friends of mine who I actually met through what was then LabTech Geek,
oh,
and now
very cool.
MSP Geek,
Oh, you were one of the
actually
OG community members. Yep.
I've been the kind of faceless guy in the crowd that I know everybody, but they don't know me, because I'm again the guy behind the curtain. So I really just kind of started doing some consulting on the side around RMM based consulting for what was LabTech back in the day, then became ConnectWise Automate. So that's kind of where I got started doing some of the MSP consulting approach. Now, as I fast forward a little bit through the start of this year, I was working for an MSP, SnapTech IT,
Sure.
and we
Carl.
started to recognize, yeah, Carl and Sean, Randy. So started to recognize what we were beginning to do with a tool called Roost and some of the RPA workflows that we were building that not only was there a market for us as an MSP, there was a market for our customers of the MSP to start to build automations and further make those customers, a little more sticky, give them more value.
Sure.
And I'd had some conversations with some folks over at Roost and had started doing a few little things, on the side, building out some workflows for some of the MSPs that were working with the Roost platform. Anyway, we decided at the end of last year, beginning of this year, I partnered with Sean, Carl, and Randy and left SnapTech IT, but the four of us partnered together to form Raven Automation.
Oh, so
So,
they're involved as well with Raven.
yeah, so they're very much. in the background more advisors for me because I'm a tech at heart. I'm learning how to be a business owner every day, you know.
You're on this
So
webinar. You're doing it.
right. So yeah, I'm working with these guys. They're teaching me a lot and helping me grow, yeah, both personally and professionally, and really helping bring the opportunity for me to do the things that I love to do, which is help people automate processes, help them save time, help them generate greater returns and drive better margins. You know, so we started this up at the beginning of March, and I pretty much went to sleep as a tech one night or an automation engineer and woke up the next day as a business owner and a sales guy.
Yep.
So that's the quick history of the last 15 years of Jared.
That's a great history. And I do want to shout out another webinar that I have coming up with Kevin, who's also a big MSP geek. And Jared, maybe you can help me, but you know which Kevin I'm talking about. Dirk Chewitz. Can you say his last name? Any idea?
Man, I would so butcher that. I'm not going to do that to him, but he's an
Kevin,
awesome dude.
if you're watching, you're a great leader, and Kevin is going to talk about his transition from going from technician to director and now to his own MSP and what that's like. So shout out
Oh, that'll
to
be worth
another.
watching.
That'll be a fun one. And Kevin's a great storyteller, just like you today. You're showing. But yeah, shout out to that one. Great introduction there, Jared. You mentioned a key thing: building out workflows, and you also hinted. You mentioned, I think you said process automation. Couple points on this slide here, right? We want to understand what that automation army is. What does that mean?
Yes.
And when we did our pre-interview, you said there was task automation and process automation. Can you help define what's
Yeah.
going on here?
You know, as we look at kind of the history of automation, what we have seen as MSPs, some of the first automation tools that we really got to work with go back to simple things like, batch scripts and things of that
Yep.
nature that we would run in the old Windows XP days, prior to that, maybe even now, depending on what it is and how old you are. So, yeah, those were some of the
If it
first
don't
things that we
break,
could do,
if it's broke, don't fix it.
right? Those were some of the first things that we had that we could use to do automation, but a lot of those functions were very, very task focused. They were very specific, depending on what it was. It was a lot harder to build an all-encompassing process automation, which we'll kind of cover a little bit more in a second. As we move through the industry, we start to see things like RMN tools now come into play. Your
Yep.
Kaseya's, your Enables, your ConnectWise Automates, or LabTechs, again, depending on how long you use the product.
Yep.
Those tools started to provide us more possibilities for task automation. So task automation examples, things like building software deployment scripts,
Okay.
things like, it was actually, let's talk endpoint hardening for a minute. Back in my time as an automation engineer, I would get requests from the security team to say, hey, we need to build some hardening solutions. I'm like, all right, well, what do you want me to do?
Yep.
Because that's pretty generic, right?
There's
So
settings everywhere, right? OS, browser, application X, application Y. There's settings everywhere.
yeah. So let's take something like, SMB v1. We all know that there's tons of vulnerabilities out there in SMB v1. So back in the task automation days, what do? I've got to figure out what registry values that I need to set in order to, disable that functionality.
Yep.
I need to figure out how to monitor for that situation. I need to create a script that changes that registry value and applies it. And then after that, I still need, a monitor in place to tell me if it falls out of compliance so we can reset that script. All of those things were individual tasks. We're
That sounds
checking,
like
we're
four
updating.
different steps or four
They
different
are.
scripts just to do one setting.
They could be, of course, all of this
You
depends
can
on your
combine it for
individual
sure.
tool. But the
Mm-hmm.
reality is, okay, great. I now have to figure out all of those things. And that's only one single setting on an endpoint. What about, all of the SSL versions or TLS versions? What about admin shares on a machine?
LLM and
What
R, right?
about enumeration?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, we could go on and on and on. And honestly, you're going to be more well versed in all of those different settings than I am. But
I
yeah,
might be able to
so
keep up, but I don't know about well versed.
yeah, I mean, so those are all examples of simple task-based automation.
Okay.
Now, when we move on to some of the more modern tools, so again, you've got products like Roost, you have products like PIA, ConnectWise RPA is on the scene. You've got some enterprise products like Power Automate or Power Platform. If you think about the entire suite, you have Tines, you have UiPath. We have all of these different tools. Now, what these can let us do is automate an entire process. And what I mean by that is we'll take the classic, most MSPs, when they engage us for the first time, the very first thing they ask us to do is usually related to user onboarding processes.
Okay.
So what happens? We get the request from the customer or from the tech that's submitting the request, whatever that case may be. We've got to create a user account. We've got to create a mailbox. We've got to assign a license. We may even have to procure a license if we don't have one already. We may need to set them up in your HR platform or your accounting package. We may need to join them to various security groups or things of that nature.
This is all
So
just
when
to
we
get
start,
one client or one employee at one client, right? This is a lot of steps you're already
absolutely.
describing.
Absolutely. And every MSP has a slightly different approach for user onboarding. Yeah, there's a lot of, core common functionality. There's only a few ways you can create a user account. But at the end of the day, every one of our customers that we work with are different. They have different software packages. The beauty of RPA tools is that we can come in and leverage those APIs and create a seamless automated process. So what does that look like? Maybe we deliver a form to a user or to an employee. They fill out the form and click submit. What happens next? We create a ticket in the PSA so we can track what we're doing. We create the account. We set up the mailbox. We assign a license. We create all of the credentials and accounts in the various tools that we need. Maybe we create a randomly generated password and we document that in your IT Glue or Hoodoo instance or whatever your documentation system is. So when that person starts, you've got that. You can go ahead and give them that randomly created password. Maybe
Help
we
me
enforce MFA.
help me understand this as someone new to this whole process automation discussion. It sounds like process automation is the higher picture of putting a bunch of task automations to flow together.
You nailed it. Yes. So task automation, those are the building blocks for process automation. And that's really where we are in the industry today is we now have tools at the MSP level that allow us to truly build automated processes. Can we automate everything? No. Is it worth
Will we
automating
try?
everything? Maybe, maybe. There are some things I'd argue that may not be worth automating. And at the risk of upsetting someone somewhere, I'll say, hey, if you've got a customer that only hires one person a year, is it really worth automating that process? How many years will it take you to get a return on that?
It's a good
So
point.
those are things that you need to consider before you even begin to build automation. But yeah, I'm kind of getting ahead of myself there a little bit.
That was actually a really good take. I had not heard that perspective, nor had I really considered it. So we are going to jump around this presentation because I did put amazing ChatGPT images to reference and keep us on schedule. But that was a really good takeaway, and so I'm glad it came early. Talking about all this automation, there's still a lot of manual out there, and like you said, we may want to keep some of it if it's not worth it. But what's the risk of not automating things? Is there actual chaos to manual processes? Does automation really bring that much order, or is this just a nice to have?
Well, let me ask. You wake up every morning, you get a shower, you brush your teeth, you put on deodorant, you get yourself dressed.
You got access to my camera,
You
Jared?
go,
You're hitting it spot on.
but I hope not. If you're like me, you make a really big cup of coffee every morning because I'm not a morning guy. And before you walk out the door, you have to grab your car keys, you got to grab your wallet, all of those things. So that's a pretty well oiled routine for you, right?
Every day,
You ever leave the house and forget your wallet?
of course.
That's the risk of manual processes. No matter how many times we do it, no matter how good you are at it, no matter how much experience you have with that process, you're human, you're going to make a mistake.
Yep.
When we automate a process, if a mistake exists in the process, it's because we didn't code it. So we can go back, we can update that automation to make sure we don't do that the next time. And that automation is going to fire off and do it the same way every single time.
That makes a lot of sense. And in some aspects, this automation maybe will increase accountability.
It can. It can also improve security. And what I mean by that is one of the driving factors for me personally at my last MSP is we had some really great account managers. But
Sure.
our account managers were non-technical. They were there to manage relationships with our customers. They weren't there to go in and do all of the IT related tasks.
Sure.
So vendors as a whole, while they offer different levels of security, it's pretty common that not every vendor does a great job of really giving good restrictive permissions for different roles. So the beauty of automation is now I can use an API account and I can write the only function I want you to be able to do and not actually have to give you access or give you those levels of permissions that you don't need to do your
Oh,
job. So you can, have an effect on your security posture by leveraging automation and removing the access to things that people should not be able to do.
yeah.
Not to
And this,
mention you have fewer accounts to log into that platform.
yep. And again, this is perspective that I didn't even consider. And I provide through Senteon a very task automation tool. We automate a lot of the processes too because we're performing the remediation, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But I never really considered the higher level security benefits of restricting access, right? So I want to again just shout out vendors who want to be partners like Raven Automation, right? They understand they are the expert and they're willing to coach and work with you to make sure you set up things correctly. So shout out to vendors who want to be partners out there. But let's keep this moving a little
Well,
bit
yeah,
here. Oh,
to that
yeah,
point, to be clear too, this is not a stab at vendors. Vendors have a very,
true.
very difficult job because it's impossible for them to predict how every single MSP is going to use that product or that tool. So they have to, build what they believe will be the best case scenario for everyone. But you can't. It's just the way it boils. Yeah, they have an impossible job.
Yep, absolutely. All right, let's go to this next slide here. So we're just saying, stay an easy target or automate. You just hinted a little bit, kind of transitioned perfectly with that better security through automation, right? Asset protection. We don't necessarily need to dive deeper into that, but I really want to focus on the ROI of automation, and feel free to reference the protection as well. But is there ROI here? I think that's a dumb question, but yes.
Well, yes, there's absolutely ROI, and that ROI comes in a lot of different forms, right? There's the obvious financial side of things, right? If I automate a process that my automation can run in 5 minutes, but it would take a human an hour to do it, I obviously have a win there. We can all do that math. But what are some of the other forms of ROI that you can get out of automation? We cover the potential for an improved security posture, right? There is the wonderful value of taking away the mundane work that we have people doing. I would never be where I'm at in my career if it wasn't for going back and being challenged in the early days with things I didn't know how to do
I
and
love
having
that.
some wonderful senior level resources and leaders that really challenged me to make me do things outside of my comfort zone. The beauty of automation is we can take those mundane tasks. Everyone knows how to do them. We're not getting any value or growing skills out of doing that repetitive task over and over again. We can fully automate that. And now the time that we're saving, not only are we saving time, but we can take that time that that resource would have been doing to run that manual process, and we can challenge them with more work that could grow their
Yeah.
skills, you know?
Maybe more interesting work too, because I have heard a lot of the
Exactly.
tasks can bore some senior level engineers, and that might influence them to look for a new position, right? That may be too
Absolutely.
boring and repetitive that they want to be challenged. Is that fair?
Yeah, as I go back to again the last MSP I worked for, so we have a senior developer on staff at Raven. His name's Joe, and Joe was a sysadmin, at the last MSP. We worked together, and Joe is a great guy. He's incredibly smart. Honestly, I'm surprised because I've many years of building automation, and Joe is now the guy that I need to go to ask questions because he's just naturally good at it. But as we're going through, Joe is a sysadmin. He's doing escalation after escalation after escalation. It's the same things over and over again. I know that all of our MSP friends out there can relate.
Yep.
He's burned out. At this point, he's ready to leave, but he's a phenomenal guy. So what do? We bring him over and he starts to work with me directly because I'm the only guy building out automation for the MSP, and I have, months and months of work that's backlogged that I can't get to.
Sure.
So Joe comes over, start teaching him a few basic things around automation, set him up with some best practice ideas. And all of a sudden, it's like overnight, he is now leaps and bounds better than I ever was.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so yes, there's a lot of value in taking those resources that may be doing those same things over and over and over again. And now that you challenge them with different work or more interesting work, they're growing.
That's awesome. And I mean, that's engineer happiness. I mean, that's kind of something you can't measure, right? But there is
Absolutely.
technically, I mean, there's ROI to that, right? And this is something that, even Senteon talks about, right? No engineer wants, you shared a 4-step process to change one setting. We're changing over 1,000 settings. That's over 4,000 steps, depending on how many scripts you combined, right?
Right?
So that's a lot of work. It gets redundant, it gets annoying, frustrated again, because some of these changes that you think took don't take, right? A week later, you have to go
Well,
back and do it again.
not only is that a lot of work, but you guys are also accounting for, let's take PowerShell for an example.
Sure.
You're going to find machines out there that don't have recent versions of PowerShell. And of course,
Yeah.
commandlets change over time. I like to use the expand archive commandlet. Everybody can relate to, unpacking a zip file.
Yep.
Was it PowerShell version 5, I think, that added expand archive? Doesn't matter. But prior to those days, if I wanted to work with a zip file, I'd need a PowerShell script that would download 7-zip and do some command line stuff with 7-zip to extract an archive. Now with a modern version of PowerShell, I can just use expand archive. So those are challenges that you guys are able to solve with
Yep.
your automation is
Yep.
version
PowerShell list.
control.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Version control. hmm No, that's a great shout out there. And going back to this just engineer happiness, the other point we have on here is happy clients, happy life. Every
mhm,
MSP is different here. So some engineers will never go external. But when they do and they interface with these clients, I mean, if they're happy and satisfied with what they're doing, do you think that's going to make the client happier and seeing that reaction and that emotional state of the person they're talking to?
yeah, like I went to a fast food restaurant this morning to grab a terribly unhealthy breakfast.
What'd you
And the
get? We
person
gotta
that
pause. What'd you get?
just a chicken biscuit, nothing
There you
fancy,
go.
pretty vanilla. So
Delicious.
I mean, debatable. It was food, and I was hungry, and I like food, so there you go. So as I'm there at the first drive-through window, very pleasant person that collected payment for the order. I get to the second window, the person says nothing at all.
No.
I can clearly see by that simple interaction that it was all of maybe 30 seconds at each window who likes their job and who doesn't like their job. And
Yeah.
if you think your customers can't see that when people go on site, then you're wrong.
Yep. Absolutely. And I think the big takeaway I just want to emphasize again is many people, I mean, the people I surround myself with are very like-minded to me. For example, Jared, like you're someone I want to be around, right? I
I'm
will
sorry.
get bored. Right? I mean, you're a friend at this point, so you might be doing another
Uh,
webinar, who knows. But you're someone who doesn't want to get complacent, doesn't want to be bored. I'm the same way. So if Senteon ever kind of restricted me, right, as a co-founder, kind of hard to restrict, but if they told me I couldn't do something, I would get frustrated. I would want to be able to do more. And that's the type of people you want working with you, right? That's a
mhm,
mindset thing, right?
right.
Um, the other piece on this slide before we transition, right? It's literally titled "Stay an Easy Target or Automate," right? Never miss a beat. Can you talk a little bit more, maybe from like the hacker mindset, right? How does automation or automating some of these processes play a role against security, B word incidents, whatever you want to call it?
Sure. Well, again, the benefits of having automations in place that solve security related challenges and apply some of those settings that we need to be applying to our devices to keep them as secure as possible. Automation makes sure that those things are done every time. I can't tell you the number of times that I've written some code to do something and I have accidentally left a comment that I had meant to take off or had meant to remove, and
Sure.
that
Yep.
command didn't run at all. Well, it was commented out, so it didn't throw an error. I just missed it, right? You know, Automation will help make sure that we have everything done in place every time. Manual processes mean we have lots more room for error. There's a greater margin of error when we have manual processes. And those are the kinds of things that hackers, they live for. They want people to make those mistakes. They want to see those vulnerabilities left open.
Yep.
It makes their lives easier.
Yep.
So,
Absolutely.
same concept of, you lock your car when you park somewhere. Locking your doors doesn't keep someone from stealing your car, but it does reduce the likelihood because you're reducing the opportunity.
The attack surface, the blast radius. This is things that
Mm,
we may be talking about a little bit later, but this is what I talk about in every conversation, right? It's about eliminating the opportunity for that bad guy to automate their entire attack chain without
right.
pivoting, right? If they have to pivot, they have to change one thing about their process. I'm not a hacker, but I am bet they're going to move to the next target because there's an abundance of targets. Why invest an extra 5 minutes when you can just go to the next person, right?
Yeah, look, if I've got $100 bill sitting on the table here and I have $100 bill sitting on the table that is in a locked box, which one am I going to take? I'm going to
One on
take
the
the one that's
table in front
easier.
of me.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
actually, I'm probably
Mm-hmm.
going to take both, but that's besides the
I'm taking the whole box in that scenario. I'm not even going to unlock it. I'll deal with it later.
right, right. But you get the point. People, we take the path of least resistance. And if you're an easy target, then you're going to be hit.
Yep. All right, let's go to this next slide here. Making automation work for you, right? That's the end of the day. That's what this needs to be. If you're automating
Mhm.
something that isn't bringing value, for example, that thing you do once a year, hire an employee, right? It may not work for you. It may not be necessary, right? And we did already
Right.
introduce what an automation engineer is. If there's more you want to elaborate here, feel free. But the big thing here, guys, you can't, and you emphasize this, and I will preview. We're going to give out an automation game plan, kind of talk high level about the thoughts to go into automation before doing it. But why is it so important to understand your business and have the right people in place before even starting this?
Yeah, a big part of having the right people in place and understanding the business is you have to understand the business in order to see your opportunities for automation. You know, could I automate something that sends a happy birthday message to somebody on their birthday? Sure. Should I? Probably not, because it's not going to be very personal. It's not going to feel the same. So
No,
having
you
someone
can
that is
tell those
able
are
to,
automated. Mm-hmm.
yeah, I mean, absolutely. But having someone that's able to truly understand the business and see the opportunities and see the bigger picture, you know, that's key. I mean, that's a big miss for a lot of MSPs today. They do have very good technical resources building automation. This is not a negative thing about automation engineers. But many automation engineers for an MSP start as just techs or just sysadmins. And it's drilled into your head that you're going to work the ticket that comes to you every single time. You're going to get the ticket, you're going to work the ticket. Well, as an automation engineer, you have to be able to step back and understand, you know what? I just got a ticket to automate something. It's going to take me 15 hours to build this. But
Mm-hmm.
we only run this, we run into this thing once or twice a year, and it only takes us 10 minutes or 15 minutes to fix. Is that really worth the time? So
Mm-hmm.
you almost have to go against the way you were trained of just working every issue as it comes up and
Yep.
start to question everything.
Wow. Questioning everything, I think, is everyone can take that away. I mean, taking things for granted is just you can't do it anymore. I mean, even vendors, when I have those conversations with my partners, I want them to question why I do something. If they outline something in my automation that it's like, hey, why does it even tell me this, or why do I need to click this? I'm going to run that back to my automation engineers, in this case, all my co-founders, right? They're all doing all the automation to it. But they are the ones who are going to be able to say, yeah, that does make sense. And we might oversee it because we're so close. As vendors,
Hmm.
we are the closest ones to our technology, and we need partners, prospects, right? You do a demo, tell me what you don't agree with. Tell me what you see that I don't, right? We want that
Right.
communication track, right? So really good takeaway there, Jared. I want to talk a little bit more. You said, automation engineers a lot of the time start as techs. So I got kind of two questions for you, and I will shout out
Hmm.
Raven. I understand you guys are growing. So if you are an automation engineer looking to get into that field, connect with Jared after the show.
Yes, please.
But the question here, the two-parter, right? Does every automation engineer have to start as a tech? Or are there things that you would see on a resume without experience, right? That you'd say, huh, they could start as an automation engineer even though they haven't been a tech.
Yeah, I mean, not everyone has to be a tech, but I think to really answer that question, you've got to understand your target customer profile. You know, case in point, I could bring on a bunch of software developers to build out automations, and they would do a phenomenal job with it, right? There'd be great error handling, there'd be great clean code, good documentation, but do they understand your business? Are they going to be able to talk to you as the MSP and help you realize that, hey, what you're asking us to do, first of all, we can definitely do it, but I don't think it's going to give you a very good return for the time investment. I think that maybe that would be something that you add on to your automation roadmap as a nice to have, or maybe a low priority item. And let's really dive into your business to find the things that are going to give you the most return. So that there is a good benefit of having experience as a tech and really understanding what your customers need so that you can see it from their perspective. I can tell you that whenever I'm building out anything new,
Mm-hmm.
it's not the back end code or anything like that that
Yeah.
takes yeah, I mean, it takes time, right? But that's never the difficult part. The hard part's the front end, the user interface piece.
Mm-hmm.
Every time I deliver a new form or a web app or something like that, I need to sit down and go through all of those things with the people that are going to be using it so that I can make sure that what I'm putting out there for them to see makes sense to them. It doesn't have to make sense to me. It needs to make sense to the person that's going to be using it.
Yeah.
So that's really where all of this comes into play is, if you want to be truly effective, you need to have people that can put themselves in the position of your customer and build the things that they need that will make sense to them. Because that's also going to help them use it.
It's a great summary there. I mean, in essence, what you're saying really talks towards that last point, right? You need to understand what needs to get done, what's going to benefit that end customer, right? Not just internally, but the whole picture. So that's a good summary. And we're going to transition to more of a technical setting conversation here regarding automation with hardening. But I mean, before we transition, is there anything else high level you want to talk about needing to define task and processes before you start?
No, I mean, I don't think so. I think we've
I think
pretty
you're
well
good.
covered the concept of task versus process and those
Cool.
kinds of things. I think we're good.
All right, let's dive into this next setting or next slide rather, but it's going to talk about settings. So Fort Knox, your endpoints. Again, we are Senteon. We are hardening workstation servers and browsers to the CIS standards. And Jared hinted a little bit ago about his expertise at manually changing just one setting, right? Unfortunately, there is more than just one setting. There are about 500 on a workstation, 400 some on a server, and another 100 some on each browser, right? And that doesn't take account all the applications, all the 365, right? This is so many hundreds of hours of work to do manually. And Jared will probably talk about that, but it's again relating back to those vendor relationships. These configurations are some of the most impactful, potentially disruptive things to that end client. So really working with your vendors, working with them to become a partner is critical to avoid causing any issues. But Jared, kind of take this away, specifically looking at configurations and automation, you know, talk to us about your experience.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I was an automation engineer. Yeah, I have SSCP as a certification, right? But we had other people on staff that, had much higher levels of certification from the security side of things
Mm-hmm.
that were much more well versed in those things than I was. Security was their area of expertise. Automation was my area of expertise.
Mm-hmm.
They don't always overlap. So we only know what we know. All right.
Mm-hmm.
So let's think for a second. I get a request to build something to harden an endpoint. And I use the SMB v1 scenario. Let's say
Everyone
it
knows
takes
it.
an
Mm-hmm.
hour to figure out, what do I need to do to correct that? Cool. I know that it takes me another 30 minutes or so to build some monitoring or something like that to determine that, oh, this value isn't set. We need to run a script to fix that. So all in, I'm probably an hour and a half, 2 hours in. That's a single action. Well, if my hourly cost to the business is hypothetically $50 an hour, it costs $100 for the to the company for me to build that the first time. That doesn't count maintaining that at all. Now you multiply that by what do we say, 1,000 settings?
Yeah, 1,000 between workstation and server, and then some browsers.
If it took me 2 hours at $50 an hour to build all the automation for each one of those settings, you're looking at 100 grand to build it. That counts, doesn't count anything around maintaining or anything like that. Just the initial, here's what it is, here's how do we solve that. So
Now,
having products, there is a thing that we need to consider that, while we can build a lot of automation, simple PowerShell, simple workflows, they don't always replace good tools. There can be a lot of benefit to having a tool that's designed to, do that task. In fact, at my last MSP prior to parting and forming Raven, we had some initiatives to build some AI concepts that would handle
oh
some of
wow,
our documentation processes. So, the idea is cool. We get all of our documentation, we expose that to the AI, so we teach it our documentation, and we let that AI read every ticket as it comes in as a moderated ticket note, and then output some suggested solutions based on our documentation.
that's a nice process automation example.
That particular piece, we had estimated, there was a lot of things we didn't know. We had estimated over a year it would probably take around 300 hours or so to build something like that from the ground up. But again, a lot of things we didn't know. We had at the time we had never, trained any kind of LLM or anything like that. So we're gonna have to figure out a lot along the way. But yet there are vendors in this space that do those things already.
Yep.
And when I looked at the cost, and I'm gonna use Crushbank as an example.
Sure.
While wasn't using Crushbank at the MSP, I was definitely evaluating the product and trying to justify the cost versus building it myself. So one, if I had built that myself at our hourly cost, we had anticipated that it was going to cost around $30,000 to build that automation for ourselves as a proof of concept level. That
Mm,
counted nothing around
that's
training people how
key.
to use it. That included nothing around maintaining it going forward or anything like that. Yet for very similar price points for the size of that MSP, we could have taken a tool and yeah, we would have paid that fee, every year, or I forget what the numbers were, so don't quote me on that. But we could have taken that same cost and paid a vendor who specialized in it, had the tool already functional, wasn't going to take them a year to get it implemented like it would have taken us based on our roadmap. All right. And we could have been onboarded and working in a matter of a couple of weeks versus a year.
Yeah,
So, as a business owner, does it make sense to invest the time into building that automation, or does it make sense to partner with a vendor that's already doing those things?
that's
In
a
some cases, I'm going to say partner with a vendor. In other cases,
sure.
it may make sense, to not do that.
That's a really really good point. There is, if you invest, if for example, 1,000 settings would cost like 100 grand. That is the cost of maybe a new, L1 tech or admin tech. I don't know the exact salaries of MSP engineers, but maybe that is one entire new employee, all in benefits, sourcing. It adds up,
Mhm.
probably going to be more than 100 grand. But let's say you can do it for 100 grand. That 100 grand may now replace that vendor, right? That choice, but it's going to take that admin the entire year probably to do what that admin would, I'm sorry, to do what that vendor would in a week or a day, right? So the ROI is not as simple as just cost versus result. It's cost, time, result. And that time factor, I don't feel is accounted for, or in a lot of my conversations, maybe yours as well.
Well, the reality is, if you look at a standard year in a 40-hour work week in a standard year, you have roughly 2,080 hours of capacity. So if you think that it's going to take you 2 hours to solve every one of that 1,000 controls, there you go.
Might need to just start bringing you to my sales calls, Jared. You're doing really good live on webinar. Most people are a little
I got a
nervous talking
calculator
about
I
it,
can
but
find
you're
you.
you're pretty damn good. You sure you were a tech, or are you just lying to the audience right now?
No, no, I was absolutely a tech.
Well, I mean, you're making a hell of a salesperson during this show. Thanks for the compliments here and just talking towards the ROI of automation, because the whole point of this episode here is to emphasize automation is going to be critical to stay relevant. Speaking of staying relevant, let's hit this next slide because we do want to leave you with a takeaway, right? So Jared did invest a lot of time into just creating a very high level. What 6 actions can you take from this webinar, right? What are the first 6 things you can do in order to not be left behind, right? And I know that might be a little exaggerated, right? You can do everything manually. It's not going to scale very well, and you might be left behind, right? I'm kind of shouting out there, but anyway, Jared, you made 6 steps. Talk to us a little bit about this and why the audience should use these as a takeaway.
Yeah, before we jump into the 6 steps, there's one very, very important thing that I haven't said, and I don't have it on this slide. You need to understand that automation does not replace people. Automation does let you scale your business. It does let you solve future problems without necessarily throwing more headcount at them, but it should never be used to replace people. And here's the reason for that. Before you can automate anything, you have to have a process. Otherwise, you're just kind of firing in the dark trying to figure out what you're doing. And really, before you ever have that documented process, a very, very good friend and mentor of mine, a guy by the name of Aaron, the CEO over at Roost, he likes to say this in all of his chats. First, you can't automate a process that doesn't exist,
Yep.
and you can't build a process until you've done it manually. So it's very important to understand that you still need your people to do these tasks and figure out what the process needs to look like. You have to do it manually first so that you can then document it. And once
So
once you've done that, once you've identified the process, you know how to do it manually, you have some good documentation, now you can really start to explore. So step one, do it manually, document it, have good documentation around your
I think
processes.
that's step 0 right before this chart really starts. And Jared, not to fight you live on air, but are you in Senteon scenario, speaking specifically to our automated remediation, are you saying MSPs should try to configure these 1,000 settings before even talking to us?
I'm saying that the smart business owner is going to investigate all possibilities. You should always do some form of cost analysis, right? If I do this myself, what will it take? And you need to understand it's not just what does it take to get it done, what does it take to maintain it and ensure
Not just a
compliance?
one-time thing.
That's right. Automation is never a one-time thing. That's why we don't just sell automation. We actually sell, all of our plans include monitoring and maintenance because those processes are going to have to be maintained and monitored as they go along. You know, so should you engage with a vendor? Yeah, I think you should absolutely chat with some vendors. Sit through a demo, take 30 minutes to an hour to review it so that you can make good informed decisions. Does that mean you have to partner with that vendor? No, but you'd be doing yourself a disservice if you don't explore the options that are out there.
Okay. I agree with that. I very much, any good business owner is going to weigh all options, right? Not saying you need to invest those 1,000 hours, before you even invest 1,000 hours and before you invest 10 hours, right? Look at the field, understand the field, because in this case, specific to Senteon, we've done it manually. We've already done the manual process and we automated it for ourselves. And we're offering to automate what we already documented for you.
Yeah, I mean, well, the reality is, look, 1,000 controls, the amount of time it'd take me to figure all of those things out and configure all of those settings,
Know
it
what
would
they
be
do?
extremely, extremely difficult for me to do that and have better financial results than if I'd used a vendor to do
Yeah, and every MSP does not have a Jared Brantley, so maybe you could do
it.
it in a handful
I
or
bet you
in
they're
a.
happy about that too.
All right, let's get to the action steps on this slide. We talked
Yeah,
about
yeah.
step 0. We talked about vendors. What else needs to happen?
So yeah, absolutely. Document your processes, right? But outside of that, you need to understand your business. Analyze your ticket stats. See what kinds of issues you're getting. Analyze your time entries. See where your technicians are spending that time. You've got to understand what's going on in your business before you can jump into the next point, which is identify the pain points that you're seeing there. Now, just because you see something, you may not be able to fully automate it, but there can still be benefit to having partial automation for a process. Even if you cut out 5 or 10 minutes of an hour long task, you run that task enough, you're going to have significant cost savings. I can tell you, for my last MSP, over the last 2 years or so, we've automated some things around dark web monitoring. And we can argue the benefits or pros and cons of dark web monitoring. That's not the point. The idea here is it's a service that is performed for customers to look in those breaches and see if their data is there. We fully automate that process, reduce the cost to provide that service from a labor perspective last year from about $20,000 to $600. And we're talking just a few minutes for every one of those tickets that comes in. So, it's that aggregation of small gains that equals large results. So identify your pain points after you've done all of your business analysis. Now that you know where your pain points are, you need to build a roadmap. You can't do everything at once, without a doubt. I had this conversation with a potential prospect yesterday that they were looking to implement two major systems at the same time.
Sure.
Can you do that and be successful? Sure, you can. Is it the best decision? That's debatable.
Mm-hmm.
If it were me, I would focus on one system at a time and get the system that's going to have the greatest impact to my business under control first, which is the exact advice I gave the prospect.
Yep.
Probably not a good sales move or sales tactic, but nonetheless, it's the honest truth. It's not
That's a
just
big
about
thing there,
selling to our
actually.
customers.
That's a big thing I
It's
want to
about,
emphasize
yeah,
here. What vendor honesty. Like you may have, maybe lessened your sale or even lost the sale temporarily, but what does it mean to be honest with a prospect? What does that mean to you and Raven?
yeah. I mean, look, trying to give you the best information I can and help you make the best decisions possible. That's what it's all about. You know, Do I want to make money along the way? Yeah, absolutely. We all do. But it doesn't do me any good to, make a bunch of money and make a whole bunch of people unhappy because I gave them bad advice. I would much rather build a good relationship with you over the long term and help give you the guidance that you're looking for. And if that means we do business to better, do business together, great. If that means that it's not the right relationship, well, I'd much rather identify that up front versus spend some time with you, realize it's a bad partnership, and then piss you off because it's just not a good fit.
Yep. Absolutely. And
So
we have the same mentality. And again, this goes back to the type of people I want to partner with as a vendor and vendor relationship and have on this platform. This type of stuff needs to be really talked about at a more serious level because it does matter. All right, going back to your action steps here, you did talk about
yeah,
outlining that roadmap. The very first step is document your processes, and then step 4 is roadmap. Isn't documenting my processes kind of the same as my roadmap? Help me
not
understand.
necessarily, not necessarily. So the roadmap concept, okay. So you have good process documentation for all of those manual things that your team is doing. You've analyzed your business. You kind of know what's going on in your business. You know where your pain points are. Now you have a target. You build that roadmap. Okay, this is my list of things that we need to do. This is the list of things that we want to solve, the challenges, the problems, whatever you'd like to call them. Great, you have that list. Now you need to prioritize. So that's what building that roadmap is all
Okay.
about is you've built that list of things that you want to get done. Now you need to prioritize, you need to budget and plan, establish timelines for when things need to happen. You can't
Timelines.
measure results. Well, yeah, I mean, absolutely. If you haven't gone through the process of understanding what it's going to take you to automate something or complete a task, you can't know for sure if it's going to give you a real return or when it will give you a return.
Mm-hmm.
That's
Awesome.
the important part. You don't get a return from automation overnight. You have to spend time and money to develop that process first, and then there becomes a point where you generate that return. And when should that return happen? That's different for everyone. The first automation that I built in Roost, I didn't get a positive return until about 6 or 7 months after building that process.
Wow.
Now, as we continued to progress in our automation journey, we decided that 6 months wasn't good enough. So we began to hone in on that and decided, okay, anything that we build, we want it to have a positive ROI within 3 months. So now that I know that, I can set some parameters around these things and prioritize. If I have a task that we're going to run, 4 or 5 times a day, and it's going to save me 30 minutes every time we do that, okay, great. I now know how much time I can spend working on that process to get that return in 3 months. And I can use that to make some good decisions on where that should fall in my roadmap.
Awesome. That helps me understand a lot more. So thank you for diving into that at a high level. So back to it. So once the roadmap is made, it looks like the next step is to actually develop
Yeah,
this.
man, you got to build the thing at some point. So
Step
that's what
five,
step five
right?
is
If
all
we
about.
eventually get
We
there.
got to build it. Yeah, yeah, it's time to build it. Plan it out, map out the steps that you need to do in your automation, build it, put in good error handling, make the process as robust as possible. Whatever documentation you might need, be that a service ticket, be it a text log file somewhere that you need to reference, whatever.
Mhm.
This is where you actually build it.
Out of
And
curiosity,
then,
so at
yeah, go for
Senteon,
it.
we do use, so I create all of our workflow documentation, how to generate a report, how to track changes, right? And I use a third-party tool called Tango, where I actually go to the Senteon interface, I click buttons, and it zooms in on the button that I click to show that's the next step, the next action step, I guess. When you're developing these processes, looking at the roadmap, and then have to actually map what needs to happen in this automation, are there any tools or just best practices you can recommend the audience on how to develop that ahead of time?
Yeah, so there's a lot of ways that you can do it, and it doesn't have to be complicated.
Okay,
It can be as simple as using Notepad and doing a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and literally listing out steps in the order with which they need to happen. So once you have that list and have that kind of that visual idea, great, you can start to build those things. Now, what we tend to do is we actually, being that we do a lot of work within Roost, we'll use kind of that Roost sandbox,
sure.
and we might mock up a whole bunch of tasks and just basically pop labels on those to represent visually what they should do. And then we've got that visual representation of how things need to happen. You can also use Visio. Visio is a great tool
Sure.
for
Yep.
that
I've
as
I've
well.
used that too. Now is Raven, and again, like plug yourself here. Like I want you guys to make sure everyone understands what Raven does here, right? Are you guys actually, someone comes to you, they have the processes, they have the roadmap, and then they just say, "Here, Raven, do it." Like, is that how it
Sort
works?
of. So what we do right now, we are primarily focused on professional services for the Roost platform. Roost is a fantastic product. Uh, it's got an incredible amount of power as kind of that overall orchestrator for all of the tools that we might use as an MSP. So it lets us take all of those smaller tasks and build that entire automated process. The challenge is, not every MSP is blessed to have automation resources in house. And even if you are, I can tell you when I first started using the product or the platform myself, I had no idea what I was doing and didn't think I was even capable of doing it. And honestly, didn't want to have anything to do with it. But through some good leadership, I was able to refocus, and really dive in and try to figure some of that out. But not every MSP is in that kind of position. Your average MSP, I think, has something along the lines of roughly 13 to 15 employees. That doesn't leave a lot of room for some of these extra responsibilities. And if it
Yep.
does, your automation resource is oftentimes working ticket escalations, solving other ticket problems, maybe
Yep.
helping with system management and things like that. So they're very much kind of split brain and focus on a lot of different things. So that's where we come in. We can come in and help you, augment your internal resources. If you have someone doing that work already, we can be, escalation points or help guide them and help them grow their skills, or we can build those automations for you with our basically a fully outsourced model.
That's
So
awesome.
we can, as part of that, you don't have to have your own roadmap. All you really need to do is have an idea of what your processes are. And even then, in some cases, we can help you figure that out and help you document some of those things along the way.
That hand in
So
hand partner.
yeah, I mean, all of our plans actually include a regular cadence for having an automation strategy meeting. And in that strategy meeting, we're helping you build that automation roadmap, prioritize, and make good decisions on where to build your automations.
It's
We're
awesome.
not in the business of building something just because you asked.
I like that. You have to know what you want in order to have it. That's very fair. I love that process, and those cadences are critical. Even with Senteon, right? With these settings, right? We want to make sure everyone understands why drift happens,
Mhm.
what caused it. Like that's part of our job as being a partner vendor as opposed to just a tool, right? And get into the last bar here. I know we're coming right up on the hour, but track the results. I imagine if you're using Raven, you're going to track the results for them. But if you're building this in house, how can people track the actual results? Was this automation worth it?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of ways that you can do it. Again, it doesn't have to be complicated. It's evolutionary like anything else. It could be as simple as tracking time savings. Great. If it takes a human 15 minutes to run the task, then your automation saves you 15 minutes, and you should be saving that either as a ticket note and time entry or as a database and time saved. At the end of the day, winners keep score. You have to know if your initiatives are actually giving you a benefit, and the only way to do that is by tracking those results. If you wanted to go further with it, cool. You can look at your average member cost for all of your technicians and figure out, okay, great. Is that a level one task? Well, my level one team makes, my cost to the business for level ones is this number. Is it a level three task? Great. Level threes are this number. So we can actually get really, really granular with it and show you actual, labor savings in terms of dollars and cents.
I think we might have to do a follow-up episode just around tracking results because this is something hard. I mean, even from
Yeah.
my perspective, like in my role, right? Sales, go to market, like it's hard to manage this and track all of this, right? I want to automate my results even, right? So I think
Mhm.
a separate episode, we might need to dive into that if you're up for it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool.
As long as I didn't bore the audience too much or bore the audience too much.
We'll get feedback after this, but no,
Oh
Jared,
boy.
absolutely fabulous episode. I had a lot of fun getting to learn. I mean, honestly, you taught me a lot in this episode, some sales tactics too, right? So really, really great to have you speaking with us. And to wrap up the show, any just closing last second thoughts you want to leave the audience with?
I just want to say thank you for having me and thank you for giving us some of your time to watch this today. Yeah, I'm blessed to be here. So,
Awesome. Well, we're very excited to have you as a reoccurring speaker and what you're doing for the community. So, with this, let's go ahead and wrap up and make this last slide big screen. So, we do webinars weekly at minimum. As you know, I did actually three webinars this week. But next week, we do have Mark Menzies coming up to open up our part one edge hardening series. So, really excited to dive into some of the CIS benchmarks, what they are, why they're important, and how to remediate, right? These episodes do stream directly to our YouTube channel. You're welcome to check out the replays. And if you ever mention to me you watched a webinar, you do get a free gift, 100 free internal or external assessments. These assessments can be used as a sales tool to make a sale, right? Money in your pocket. So really excited to continuously work with the community, meet the Jareds of the world. And thank you again, man. You're a great guest.